Boundaries. If you don't already know what boundaries are, let me give you the definition as I like to talk about boundaries. First thing is boundaries are not kind, they're not unkind. They just are. They are neutral. Boundaries are basically what we will and what we won't tolerate. So I may have a boundary that says that's a physical boundary. It's like I don't want people in my space. People are not allowed in my space. People are not allowed to hit me. Um, that's one that comes up with my kids a lot. So there's a whole slew of different boundaries. You can have boundaries with your children, with your spouse or partner, with friends, with coworkers, boss. You can have a boundary with anybody. And the other thing about boundaries are they are meant to serve you, and they're not the way I talk about boundaries, at least. Like, this isn't a thing that is another trap or another to do on your list or some restrictive thing that you have to stick with. A lot of people resist boundaries because they feel like it locks them in and it feels claustrophobic. But that's not what this is. It's more of like a plan. Um, so, take for instance, if you're going on a vacation and you have a hotel room booked. So, you get to the hotel room and you find out that your room isn't ready. Surprise, surprise. So your plan was that you were going to go to the hotel room and stay in your room, but your room isn't ready. So now you're flexible. So you don't need to freak out that your room wasn't ready. You just be flexible and move on to the next thing. Um, and that's more of an example with that's more of a contractual thing, like you had a contract and your room was supposed to be ready and it's not. But your boundary is flexible, okay, and it's meant to serve you. So there's no need to freak out about making a boundary because, like I said, it's just a plan. So the plan then is that if my plan is my child is not allowed to hit me, so they act like they're going to hit me and I don't stop that, or like they hit me, but they're only hitting me lightly, then I have like a choice in that moment. I'm not bound and beholden to my boundary that I've made. And so there's flexibility there. But the boundary is like, think of the boundary like a plan. And anytime you have a plan, even if things don't go according to your plan, it's at least nice to have a plan. There's two huge benefits of boundaries. When I talk about learning to say no as a mother, um, that can really be helped by boundaries. And the other thing is when we have boundaries, we have clear boundaries with the people in our lives, they're less likely to cross those boundaries when they're clear. And they are not as surprised when we take time for ourselves because they know that's part of our whole shtick. We have boundaries and we have things that we're willing to tolerate and things we are not willing to tolerate. And we have things that we're willing to do and not willing to do. So, one example of how I've used boundaries in my life is in a work setting. So, when I was at a corporate job, we worked in cubicles and I reported to a boss that had a really bad habit of micromanaging. And he was very well liked by upper management, and he was really good at like getting things done no matter what, right? Like that kind of person. And so he trusted the people that worked for him, but he also was a little bit OCD and type A and all these things. So he would come by my and my colleague's desk and freak out and just like, oh God, where's the thing? Where's the thing? And so what happens when he does that? So I'll tell you what happened with my colleague. And my colleague did not report to him for very long. She quickly transferred out of him because it was just too much for her to handle. She would freak out because she's like in the zone working, right? So she freaks out and is like, "Oh, what? I don't. Let me check that." So she drops what she's doing. She checks whatever it is he's asking her about, and then she gives him the answer, and he goes off. And now she's like, "God, what just happened?" She has to like close out all the things that were around what he was asking about, get back to what she's doing, remember what she's doing. Like, that's just, those interruptions are not good for productivity and they're really not good for like mental health. She just felt like she was walking on eggshells all the time because she never knew when he was going to show up. Now, this is how I handled that situation. I'm looking at my computer, I'm working, he comes over, freak out. What's going on? When's it done? When's it going to be done? Blah 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 blah. Like, hold on. Yes, I did the finger just like I do with anyone else. Like, hold on. Working. Finish this email I'm sending. Whatever. Hit pause. I turn. I look at him. I say, there is nothing to update on that right now. When I have an update, I will let you know. You trust me. Let me do my job. I'll let you know when there's an update. Off he goes. And I didn't drop everything. I went right back to what I was working on. I let my team work on what they were working on as opposed to messaging them, hey, what's the status? What's the status? What's the status? So it was so much less of an interruption. And so you may be wondering, like, what's the boundary there? So the boundary is I'm not going to let you micromanage me. And I don't let people micromanage me. I've actually said those words to my 6-year-old. I am not going to let you micromanage me. And he's like, what is micromanage? I'm like, oh, let me tell you. It's the benefit of a mom with a lot of work experience, micromanaging. So that's a really good example of a work boundary. I'm not going to let you micromanage me. Another really good example of a work boundary is what my colleague that I was just talking about that couldn't deal with his freakouts. She always left at 4 o'clock every day. And she was the only person in that office that I knew that left at 4 o'clock every day. And why did she leave at 4 o'clock every day? Because that was when she needed to get home to meet her kids who had stayed for some kind of practice at school, and they were getting home about that time. So she needed to get home at that time. And at the time, I didn't quite understand. I wasn't a mom. I was like, what? That was crazy. Whatever. Um, but I was just like, wow, that was crazy. She got into the office at 7 a.m. and she left at 4 p.m. every single day, unless she had a doctor's appointment, then she left earlier. But if there was anything she needed to do, she did it at home. And it was very understood. She will not be here past 4 p.m. And she made that very clear. And did anyone ask her to stay later? Yes, absolutely. All the time. Did she? No, she did not. She was always gone by 4 p.m. And it was amazing. And that is another wonderful boundary. So I've given you an example of a work boundary. So let's just take a minute, breathe. I really enjoy talking with you guys and sharing with you guys. But more importantly than me talking at you is you thinking through what it's like. What is that bringing up for you? You know, what does that feel like to you? To hear a story of someone telling their boss to hold on or to come back later, or to hear about a woman saying, I'm leaving at 4 p.m. and that's what I'm doing. So that's really the heart of this is what does this feel like for me? Yeah. beautiful thing about boundaries is that once we get used to setting boundaries, we start to really like it. And it can be really helpful. And I'll say too, I'm sure there's a brilliant quote about this, and I'll say it much less eloquently, but basically, if you set a boundary in your life and someone gets really upset about that boundary and they maybe accuse you of not being as devoted, not being as caring, whatever, not pulling your weight, whatever it is, they have a negative reaction to you setting a boundary in your life. I want to encourage you that for the most part, the degree to which someone dislikes your boundary is usually correlated to the degree in which they were taking advantage and profiting off of your lack of boundaries. So, why do I say this? I say this um, to sort of armor you up, you know? So, when you go to set a boundary and when anyone is first doing it, you maybe do it wrong, like you don't use all the right words, whatever. But when you do this and someone in your life gets really upset, that may push you to back off and say, oh, I shouldn't have done that. You're right. Sorry. But what I want to encourage is don't pull back. Keep going with it. You know, if you do something, if you try to set a boundary and you end up being rude about it, you can apologize for being rude. You can work on that. You can also explain what you're trying to do in your life. But don't assume that because someone else is unhappy about your boundary, that that means your boundary is a problem. Yeah, yeah. So another story about boundaries. My partner, when he used to come home from work when he went to work in person. Now in COVID, he doesn't go anywhere, so he's always on time. No, he's still late. He's still late coming back up from the office, the basement office. But we would have an agreement that I serve dinner at 5:30, say, and he would get home between 5:30 and 6. That was our deal. So since that was our deal, he was home at 6 o'clock most days, and some days he'd be home at 6:15, and then some days he'd be home at 6:30. And this really annoyed me. It really bothered me. And so we had a lot of conversations about it that went nowhere. But eventually, we were able to have a really good conversation. And the how we got there is a much longer story. But let's just eventually, we got to a really good place where I said, it's just really helpful to me to know when you're going to be home. If you are unable to tell me within this range when you're going to be home or let me know that you're going to be late, like I can work around that, but it's annoying because you're the only person that eats the dinner that I make. So like the kids just scream at me no matter what I make. So that was really what it boiled down to. And it's also if I'm making dinner for me and the kids, I'm much more likely to make boxed mac and cheese because I like mac and cheese too. But um, so eventually he was getting home in that range. And so instead of getting home at 5:30, he'd get home at 5:45. So 15 minutes. He's well within range, right? So he walks in the door and says hello, blah blah blah, yada yada yada. And he's like pauses. And he's like, "Nope. Nope. Not going to apologize." What? He's like, "I'm not going to apologize. I'm not going to apologize. I'm not I'm not late. Nope, I'm not going to apologize. Here I'm like, who said you needed to apologize? What are you talking about? And he's like, I'm not late. I'm like, I'm aware that you're not late. Why are you announcing that you're not late? I'm like, why are you defensively telling me that you're not going to apologize? And sometimes he would be late and he would be like, nope, I'm not going to apologize. I'm allowed to work. And I'm like, okay, yes, you're allowed to work, but you can still apologize when you're like inconveniencing me. That's okay. And so what was happening was like he was having such inner conflict about it that he felt like he was failing. And so he was getting defensive in his own head. And so what was coming out at me was like rudeness and defensiveness when I didn't say anything. This still happens in other situations, but we've both gotten a lot better about it. I recognize it a lot quicker, so I'm much less impacted by it. But in those situations, his boundary was I can't tell you when I'm going to be home every day. I don't work that way. And I am definitely not going to be home past this time. If I'm going to be home past that time, I will definitely call you and I won't miss like bedtime without talking to you about it first. So that was his boundary. Now, him coming in getting defensive and being rude to me was definitely something he needed to work on. But did that mean that he needed to change his boundary? No, that was okay. We had discussed it, we had an agreement, that's fine. But the rudeness and the defensiveness, the outbursts at no one um, that were at himself, but was directed towards me, was not okay. So when you're figuring this out, don't feel like you have to get everything right. It is really helpful if you're trying to set boundaries to communicate that to your loved ones. You maybe don't, depending on the relationship you have with your boss, you might not want to talk to your boss about the fact that you're implementing boundaries, but it would be good to talk to your partner about and say, hey, I'm trying to implement some boundaries in my life, and I just want you to know that that's happening. And yeah, I just want you to be aware of it. And that way they can support you in that and help you recognize if you're being unkind. But there's also a little bit of there's learning for both of you, right? Because like if you've watched any Disney movie, right? Like there's no boundaries in romance. It's all violating boundaries. And that's not cool. So the idea here is that you start putting in some boundaries in your life. And if you're not sure where to start putting in boundaries, the the way I would encourage you to do this, we'll do it right now, actually. We'll do it together. So, again, breath, some people, breathing is not a calming activity. And so, if every time I tell you to take a breath, you get nervous or freak out, um, you might do something else. You might do like squeezing fists or something grounding. Um, okay. So, taking that in, I want you to think about um, if you have a journal, you can write it down, or you can just think about it. Think about a time, I guess I should say recurring times, something in your life that is a continual battle. And what I mean by that is like every time you go to the store, you lose your temper, or every time you get on Facebook, you get into an argument, or every time you go to the grocery store, you and your partner fight. Something that is always a thing, right? What is it in your life that is always a thing? So Just take a few minutes. Let's dig in here. So if my thing that came up for me that I'll share is, for me, it's I have a meeting that I do every Saturday, and it's a group that I've been meeting with for years. And I meet with this group every Saturday, and it's at 11 o'clock. And I was actually thinking about something that isn't as much of an issue now, but at one point was very difficult because we would always be out and about, and it'd be like, oh crap, it would kind of sneak up on us. And it was kind of lack of planning. But I would tell my partner in the morning, I have my meeting at 11, and we would go do whatever, and we'd come back, and then he would be working on something, and I wouldn't be able to find him when 11 o'clock came around. So here I am scrambling, and I'm trying to get a show on for the kids to go to my online meeting. And it was just kind of it was often an argument. And so in that situation, when I wasn't frustrated, I had a conversation with my partner, and I said, look, this meeting is really important to me, and it would really help me if you could make it a priority to be with the kids during that time. And I'd like for you to do that about 10 minutes before my meeting. So that is something I need from you. And I asked him, is that something you can do? If it's not something he can do, then I need to plan differently. So he says, yeah, totally fine. That's absolutely something I can do. And getting that boundary around it was good. And so Saturday rolls around, he forgets. He's like, oh, where do you want to go? What do you want to do today? Want to go out here? Want to go out here? And I preemptively say, I need to be back by 10:40 because my meeting is at 11. So we can do those things. I want to be back by 10:40. And it's not really up to him to get me to my meeting. What is up to him that he has agreed to is that he is going to be with the kids starting at 10:40, right? And so in this conversation, and I mean in this scenario, we had a conversation about it. He agreed to it. If he continues to not do that, then he's violating my boundary, right? And that's up to us how we react when someone violates our boundary. And so that is a much bigger conversation. Um, but yeah, so that's the talk about boundaries. Boundaries is such a great topic. I think I could do like a whole series on boundaries. This is not the first talk I've given on boundaries either. So there's so much goodness in boundaries, and there's just so much to cover. So your kids, yeah. Um, I will say a boundary that I have with my kids is I am not going to let you hit me. And I used to do a lot of telling them, don't hit me, or we don't hit people, or blah, 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 blah. And I've changed the way I talk to them about it. And I do tell them, you're not allowed to hit me. You're not allowed to hit anyone. But when they're in this heated moment where they're wanting to hit me, I will say to them, I am not going to let you hit me. And so often when I say that, their little bodies release. And it's not like they get happy all of a sudden. They're still angry, but it's almost like there's a release. Like oftentimes their shoulders drop and it's just like they don't need to be in control because I've let them know I am in control. I am not going to let you hit me. I am the grown up. I am the authority here. So that's the biggest boundary I'd say that we have with our kids is you're not allowed to hit me. And more than you're not allowed to hit me, I'm not going to let you hit me. Because that tells them that we are in charge and it gives them a sense of like ease because kids think that they rule the world and they think the world is centered around them. But that's a big responsibility, being in charge of the whole world. And I think sometimes that can get overwhelming to kids. And so just knowing that, okay, a grown up is in charge and I'm safe. And even though I want to hit you, I, I agree. I'm not going to do it. Doesn't always work. Sometimes I have to physically restrain them so that they don't hit me or hurt themselves or hit someone else or whatever. But just even saying those words, I'm not going to let you hit me, that I've found is really powerful for them. I'm going to stop the recording now and let's get into it. Oh, before I stop the recording, if you're watching this after the fact and you have questions about what I've talked about or you want clarification, I mean, it's also like 8, between 8 and 9 o'clock. So if I said something that doesn't make sense, it's possible that it was a miscommunication. It's possible that you need more clarity. Possible that I said completely the wrong thing. So just message me or feel free to reach out if you want to chat some more. Thanks. And we'll get into questions here.